Good morning and welcome to the First Unitarian Society of Madison. My name is Kelly Crocker and I'm one of the ministers here, and today I'm joined by my colleague, the Reverend Kelly Asprooth-Jackson, and the worship team of Drew Collins, Linda Warren, Heather Thorpe, and Daniel Carnes. The vision of First Unitarian Society is growing souls, connecting with one another, and embodying our Unitarian Universalist values in our lives, our community, and our world. For those here with us in person, it is a joy to be with you this morning. We ask that you leave your mask on for the entirety of the time that you're here with us in the building, and that immediately following the postlude, you join us outside for coffee hour over by the tent and the lovely heaters. We can do this. We also ask you not to sing along with the hymns, but we do invite you to hum. For those of you joining us virtually today, we are so very glad to have you with us. We hope you will be able to join us for our virtual coffee hour immediately following our service, where you will be warm and in your homes. The information for joining can be found on the homepage of our website, fusmadison.org, as well as on the slide that will be seen again after the postlude. Our announcement slides will also be shown briefly after today's service. We encourage you to take a moment and learn more about our upcoming programs and activities. And I invite you now to join me in a moment of silence as we center ourselves, bringing ourselves fully into this time together as we join once again in community. The wheel of the year has turned again. Once more, the Thanksgiving season has arrived. How shall we sing our song of gratitude now? For what shall we give thanks?
For this moment, for friends near and far, for our breath, for love, for courage and clarity, for strength, for delight, for laughter, for beauty.
For the tables round which we gather, for the food we enjoy with friends, seasoned with love and memory.
For the sun and moon and stars in the sky, for the trees who have seen so much and still stand proud, stretching themselves to the sky.
For the bright voices of children, for the wisdom of elders, for actions that bless the world, for hard work that makes a difference.
For music and art and celebration, for generosity, for compassion, for endurance, for joy, for hope.
For all these things, we give thanks as we worship together.
And now I invite you to join me in the words for the kindling of our chalice flame. We light our chalice as a symbol of gratitude as we celebrate the abundance of our lives together. In this sanctuary, we harvest bushels of strength for one another and offer our crop with the hands of compassion and generosity. In the authentic and gentle manner of our connections, we cultivate a simple sweetness to brighten our spirits. May we be grateful for the ways we nourish and uplift each other, for it is the sharing of this hallowed time together that sustains us.
Rise up, O flame, by thy light glowing. Show to us beauty, vision, and joy. please sing with hymn number 67. We sing now together. We sing now together our song of thanksgiving, rejoicing in the goods which the ages have wrought, for life that enfolds us and helps and heals and holds us and leads beyond the goals which our forebears once sought.
We sing of the freedoms which martyrs and heroes have won by their labor, their sorrow, their pain. The oppressed befriending, our ampler hopes defending, their death becomes a triumph. They died not in vain.
We sing of the prophets, the teachers, the dreamers, designers, creators, and workers and seers, our own lives expanding, our gratitude commanding. Their deeds have made immortal their days and their years. We sing of community now in the making, in every far continent, region, and land, with those of all races, all times and names and places. We pledge ourselves in covenant firmly to stand.
Our story today is The Quilt Maker's Gift. There was once a quilt maker who kept a house in the blue, misty mountains up high. Even the oldest great-great-grandfather could not recall a time when she was not up there, sewing away day after day. Here and there and wherever the sun warmed the earth, it was said she made the prettiest quilts anyone had ever seen. The blues seemed to come from the deepest part of the ocean, the whites from the northernmost snows, the greens and purples from the abundant wildflowers, the red, oranges, and pinks from the most wonderful sunsets.
Some said there was magic in her fingers. Some whispered that her needles and cloth were gifts of the bewitched. And still others said the quilts really fell to earth from the shoulders of passing angels. Many people climbed her mountain, pockets bursting with gold, hoping to buy one of the wonderful quilts, but the woman would not sell them. "I give my quilts to those who are poor or homeless," she told all who knocked on her door. "They are for the cold and hungry, only those who are truly in need."
On the darkest and coldest nights, the woman would make her way down the mountain to the town below. There she would wander the cobblestone streets until she came upon someone sleeping outside in the chill. She would then take a newly finished quilt from her bag, wrap it around their shivering shoulders, tuck them in tight, and tiptoe away. Then the very next morning, with a steaming cup of blackberry tea, she would begin a new quilt.
Now at this time, there also lived a very powerful and greedy king who liked nothing better than to receive presents. The hundreds of thousands of beautiful gifts he got for holidays and his birthday were never enough. So a law was passed that the king would celebrate with his birthday twice a year. When this still wasn't enough, he ordered his soldiers to search the kingdom for those few people who had not yet given him a gift. Over the years, the king had come to own almost all of the prettiest things in the world. Throughout the castle, from top to bottom, in drawers and on shelves, in boxes and trunks and closets and sacks, all the king's countless things were stashed.
Things that shimmered and glittered and glowed, things whimsical and practical, things mysterious and magical. So many, many things that the king kept a list of all the things he owned.
And yet, with all these marvelous treasures to enjoy, the king never smiled. He was not happy at all. Somewhere there must be one beautiful thing that will finally make me happy, he was often heard to say. And I will have it. One day, a soldier rushed into the palace with news about a magical quilt maker who lived in the mountains. The king stamped his foot. And how is it that this person has never given me one of her quilts as a gift? He demanded.
She only makes them for the poor, Your Majesty, the soldier replied, and she will not sell them for any amount of money.
Well, we shall see about that, the king roared. Bring me a horse and 1,000 soldiers. And they set off in search of the quilt maker. But when they arrived at her house, the quilt maker merely laughed.
My quilts are for the poor and the needy, and I can easily see that you are neither.
I want one of those quilts, the king demanded. It might be the one thing that will finally make me happy.
The woman thought for a moment. Make presents of everything you own, she said, and then I will make a quilt for you. With each gift that you give, I'll sew in another piece. When at last your things are gone, your quilt will be finished.
Give away all my wonderful treasures? Cried the king. I don't give things away. I take them. And with that, he ordered his soldiers to seize the beautiful star quilt from the quilt maker. But when they rushed up upon her, she tossed the quilt out the window, and a great gust of wind carried it up, and away.
The king has been asked to give away all of his beautiful treasures. So far, he is refusing. We'll return to the quilt maker and the king in just a moment. But for now, we invite you into a time of giving of your own treasure as we invite you into our time of offering. I did think that was pretty smooth. Thank you. Our outreach offering recipient this week is Nehemiah, who focuses on strengthening the African American community. Nehemiah cultivates character, leadership, and economic development through culturally grounded programs. Their Justified Anger initiative works to eliminate racial disparities in the greater Madison area by developing relationships, solutions, and systems. So you will see on the screen that you can donate directly from our website, fusmadison.org. You'll see our text to give information there as well. For those of you here in person, there are offering baskets at all of the doors. And we thank you for your generosity and your faith in this life we create together.
The king was now very angry. He marched the woman down through town and up another mountain where he had his royal iron makers shape a thick bracelet of iron. Then they chained her to a rock in the cave of a sleeping bear. Once more the king asked her for a quilt, and once more she refused. "Very well then," the king replied. "I'll leave you here, and when the bear awakens, I'm sure he will make a very fine breakfast out of you."
Later, when the bear's eyes opened and he saw the woman in his cave, he stood on his mighty hind legs and gave a roar that rattled her bones. She looked up at him and sadly shook her head. "It's no wonder you're so grouchy," she said. "You've nothing but rocks on which to rest your head at night. Bring me an armful of pine needles, and with my shawl, I'll make you a great big pillow." And that is what she did. No one had ever been so kind to the bear before, so he broke the iron bracelet and asked her to spend the night.
Now, although the king was very good at being greedy, he was very bad at being mean. All that night he could not sleep for thinking about the poor woman in the cave. Oh my, what have I done?" he wailed. So he woke up his soldiers, and they all marched in their pajamas up to the cave to save her. But when they arrived, the king found the quilt maker and the bear having a breakfast of berries and honey.
Now the king completely forgot about feeling sorry and became angry all over again. He ordered the royal island makers to build an island barely big enough for the woman to stand on her tiptoes. Once again, the king asked her for a quilt, and once again, she said no. Shortly after he left, the quilt maker saw a sparrow flying across the great lake. A cold, fierce wind was blowing, and it did not look like the poor bird would make it to the shore. The quilt maker called to him, and he stopped to rest on her shoulder. The poor, tired sparrow was shivering, so the woman quickly made him a coat from scraps of her purple vest. When he was warmed and the wind had stopped, the bird flew off. But he was very grateful to the quilt maker for what she had done. Soon the sky darkened as the air filled with a huge cloud of sparrows, thousands of wings beating together. They swooped down, lifted the woman in their little beaks, and carried her safely to shore.
Again that night, the king could not sleep for thinking about the woman alone on the island. Oh my, what have I done?" he moaned. So he woke up his sleepy soldiers again, and they marched in their pajamas down to the lake to set the woman free. But when they arrived, she was sitting on a tree limb sewing tiny purple coats for all the sparrows. "I give up," the king shouted. "What must I do for you to give me a quilt?"
As I said, give away all of the things you own, and I will sew a quilt for you. And with each gift that you give, I will add another piece to your quilt.
"I can't do that. I love all my wonderful, beautiful things."
But if they don't make you happy, what good are they?
"That's true," the king sighed. And he thought about what she had said for a long, long time, so long that weeks went by. "Oh, all right," he finally muttered. "If I must give away my treasures, then I must."
The king went to his castle and searched from top to bottom for something that he could bear to give away. Frowning, he finally came out with a single marble. But the boy who received it smiled so brightly in return, the king went back for more things. Eventually, he brought out a pile of velvet coats and went about the town, giving them to people dressed only in rags. All were so pleased that they marched up and down the street in a grand parade. Still, the king did not smile.
Next, the king fetched 100 waltzing blue Siamese cats and the dozen fish that were as clear as glass.
Then the king ordered his merry-go-round with the real horses to be brought out. Children cried with delight and cartwheeled around him, and just the smallest of smiles began to show on the king's face.
The king looked about him and saw the dancing and merrymaking and all the happiness his gifts had brought. A child took hold of his hand and pulled him into the dance. Now the king really smiled and even laughed out loud. "How can this be?" he cried. "How can I feel so happy about giving my things away? Bring everything out. Bring all of it at once."
Meanwhile, the quilt maker kept her word and started making a special quilt just for the king. With each gift that he gave, she added another piece to his quilt.
So the king kept on giving and giving. When at last there was no one left in town who had not received something, the king decided to go out into the world and find others who might be in need of his gifts.
But before he left, the king promised the quilt maker he would send a sparrow back to her each and every time he gave something away. Morning, noon, and night the wagons rolled out of town, each piled high with the king's wonderful things. And for years and years, messenger sparrows flew to the quilt maker's windowsill as the king slowly emptied his wagons, trading his treasures for smiles around the world.
On and on the quilt maker worked, and piece by piece the king's quilt grew more and more beautiful. Finally, one day, a weary sparrow flew into her window and perched on her needle. She knew then and there that it was the last messenger, so she put a final stitch in the quilt and started down the mountain in search for the king.
After a long search, she finally found him. The king's royal clothes were now in tatters, and his toes poked out of his boots. Yet his eyes glittered with joy, and his laugh was wonderful and thunderous. The quilt maker unfolded the king's quilt from her bag. It was so beautiful that hummingbirds and butterflies fluttered about. Standing on tiptoe, she tenderly wrapped it around him.
"What's this?" cried the king.
As I promised you long ago, when the day came that you yourself were poor, only then would I give you a quilt. The king's great sunny laugh made green apples fall and flowers turn his way.
"But I am not poor. I may look poor, but in truth my heart is full to bursting, filled with memories of all the happiness I've given and received. I am the richest man I know."
Nevertheless, I made this quilt just for you.
"Thank you. I'll take it, but only if you'll accept a gift from me. There is one last treasure I have left to give away. All these years, I've saved it just for you." And from his rickety, run-down wagon, the king brought out his throne. It's really quite comfortable, and just the thing for long days of sewing. From that day, the king often came to the quilt maker's house in the clouds.
By day, the quilt maker sewed the beautiful quilts she would not sell, and at night the king took them down to the town. There he searched out the poor and the downhearted, never happier than when he was giving something away.
How much would I have? How much would any of us have if the only things that we could keep were the things we were truly grateful for? This is one of the questions that the quiltmaker's gift has left me with. It seems to me almost like a fairy tale version of Marie Kondo's home organizing method, in which a person attempting to organize their living space is admonished to do away with anything that does not spark joy. Here, instead, the king ends up giving away virtually everything in his possession, initially out of the selfish, stubborn determination to earn the one thing he can't have, but ultimately because the giving away of those things does spark joy for him and gives him a reason to be thankful for the life that he leads. At the start of the story, the king has nearly everything, and yet he has no gratitude or appreciation for what he has. And at the end, he has virtually nothing, and yet his heart is full to bursting with the joyous memories that he does have. In the case of the king, his appreciation comes from helping others and getting to be a part of their joy and thankfulness. It's a vicarious experience. His happiness comes through bringing happiness to others, which seems to follow the example of the quiltmaker herself. But there exist many different reasons to be grateful. For instance, there's a Jewish folktale that is almost the inverse of the quiltmaker's gift. It goes like this. Once there was a man who lived in a very small house with a very large family. The space was so small that he felt that he never had any time to himself, never had a moment of quiet, and never had a good night's sleep. So he went to ask his rabbi for advice on what to do. The rabbi listened sagely to his plight and then asked, "Do you have a chicken?" The man responded that he did, and so the rabbi instructed him to bring the chicken to live in the house with his family. And this would solve his problem. It did not solve his problem. The house was even noisier now and even more crowded. Much more frustrated than he was before, the man returned to his rabbi. The rabbi listened again to how the problem had grown worse and asked if the man owned a goat. The man told the rabbi he did, and so the rabbi instructed him to bring the goat also to live into his house. This would solve his problem. It did not solve his problem. The goat was much bigger than the chicken, and though it wasn't quite as loud, it did chew on absolutely everything. Running out of patience now, the man returned to the rabbi, who listened to him complain again about how bad he had it, before asking if the man had a cow. The man admitted, rather hesitantly, that he did, and so the rabbi told him to bring the cow to live in his house. This would solve the problem. Unsurprisingly, it did not solve the problem. The cow took up so much of the one-room house all by itself. It was loud, it was always chewing, and it smelled awful. Finally, at his wit's end, the man went back to his rabbi, exhausted and forlorn. He pled one more time for some solution to his problem. The rabbi told him just what to do. Take the cow and the goat and the chicken out of his house. This would solve the problem. It did. He was left with a spacious house that he only had to share with his loving family. Suddenly he had so much more room, so much more quiet, and was sleeping so much better than he had before. He was filled with gratitude for his life and for the rabbi who had helped him find a solution to his problem. Now, there are several ways we might summarize the message to this story, and the simplest is probably, be grateful for your life as it is, because it could always be worse. The more positive framing might be, focusing on the good in what you do have will make you grateful for it, rather than dwelling on the limitations or the drawbacks of your life as it is. The ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus felt that life's greatest pleasures were simple ones: good food and the company of friends. It was a goal of his philosophy to attain ataraxia, which means a state of peace and freedom from fear. Epicurus wrote, "Not what we have, but what we enjoy constitutes our abundance." Those words have never been more relevant than they are today in a world that is driven so much by having and not by enjoying. The scarcity mentality that saps our generosity of spirit, that keeps some hungry and others well-fed but afraid of losing their privilege, is opposed by the attitude of abundance. Gratitude can come about simply by being really and truly pleased by life. And when we truly enjoy life, we do not fear to share it with others. We can begin to trust that there will be enough food on our tables, enough love in our hearts. Of course, there is a version of gratitude grounded in negative comparison. The idea that we should be grateful for what we have because others have it worse. And there but for fortune may go you or I. It's probably not an impulse you're expecting me to defend, but it can be a powerful force for good if that gratitude moves us to change the way that things are. Siddhartha, whom many call the Buddha, is said to have been born a very wealthy prince who was surrounded by luxury and every possible worldly pleasure. In fact, his father, the king, was so determined to keep his son away from any distraction or anything that might make him aware of the evils and pains of the world, that he made sure that Siddhartha never met anyone who was poor or hungry or sick or even old, because he feared that if his son met such people, he would be lured away from the palace by his conscience and fall in with religious types and other such unsavory characters. But the king could not insulate Siddhartha perfectly. It is said that after he grew to adulthood, the prince had a few chance encounters with people who were poor and hungry and sick and old. And because his innate capacity for compassion was so great, Siddhartha only needed these few experiences, a handful of seconds in the course of his lifetime, to see that his life in the palace had little meaning and no depth if it brought no benefit to others. And so he renounced his wealth and station and became a wandering monk, seeking enlightenment. I'll give you one more story here. I've heard it told as a Buddhist tale, although I can't swear to its actual origins with certainty. A teacher and a student were walking by the side of the road together. From around the bend, a horse-drawn cart came barreling towards them. Although it was headed straight for the pair, the driver made no attempt to stop the cart or to swerve to avoid the two figures. In order to escape they both had to dive into the bushes that lined the road, bruising themselves and soiling their clothes. As the cart continued off into the distance, the student stood up out of the bush and shook his fist at the driver, shouting obscenities. The teacher also stood and called out to the driver, saying, "May all your dreams come true, and may your life be filled with blessings." When the student asked why the teacher had blessed the man who had almost run them both over, the teacher asked the student, "Do you think that if all of his dreams had come true and his life had been filled with blessings, that he would behave like that?" I don't know that that story was intended as an invitation to a searching moral inventory, but I can't help hearing it as such. As someone who has been greatly blessed in my own life, I am caused to wonder, both by this simple story and by the account of the quilt maker and the king, am I living as though I were as blessed as I am? Are my actions and my choices as generous and compassionate as might be expected from someone who has been given so much and has so much extra to share? There are many different reasons to be grateful. And ultimately, I'm hard-pressed to call any one of them better or worse than the other. Because what truly matters about gratitude is how it opens our hearts to others. Living gratefully means living with kindness and compassion, wanting to give others a reason to experience the same gratitude we already experience within ourselves. Each week we gather, bringing with us the cares, the hurts, and the joys of recent days. We share these here knowing they are held in the love and support of this community. Roz and Charlotte ask us to light a candle for fellow choir member Linda Katowski, who was recently given a very difficult diagnosis of a returning aggressive malignancy. We are sending our love to Linda, her husband Jim, and their family. Josh asks for our prayers of hope and support as he faces difficulties in his marriage and his family. We send Josh our love and care and our prayers for a healing outcome for all. we also light a candle for this season of thanksgiving, for which I invite you now to join me in an attitude of meditation and of prayer. As the autumn enfolds our world in its russet blanket of leaves, just when the winds grow chill, let us turn our hearts towards those who need our care. In this moment, we reside in the company of ourselves and of each other, and of the holiness which dwells within and between all people. An instant in which we are hopeful and scared, tearful and glad, solemn and playful, and curious and bold. This week, each year, is a time marked out for gratitude and good company, for the sharing of the earth's abundance with family and friends. Yet not all have the chance to enjoy such comforts or such company, and so we think of those who are alone and lonely, those who are sick, those who are hungry, and those who are not free. Let us make room around the dining tables of our hearts for their cares, their needs, and the yearnings of their souls to sit together alongside our own. Sharing a world that is both beautiful and wounded, let us give thanks for the earth and all its gifts, for the technology, both electronic and biomedical, which allows us to gather this morning, and for the beating of our own hearts. May the celebrations and thanksgiving of this time remind us that each of us is connected to every other being on this planet, and so we should be aware of and attentive to the quality and the health of those connections. Amen. Finally, we light one last candle for all the joys and all the sorrow that live within the sanctuaries of our hearts. May they each be held gently in gratitude, in love, and in hope.
There is a love holding us. There is a love holding all that we love. There is a love holding all. We rest in this love. Please sing with us our closing hymn, number 1060, as we sing of hope and joy. As we sing of hope and joy today, some lonely anguish and despair, how can we lift our voices in this way while
leave this place.
Let's start with gratitude for the people we love and those who love us. Thankful they are in our lives, obliging us to open our hearts.
Let us open hearts to embrace the earth, the sea and soil and stars, blessed by bold beauty, the bounty of being.
Then, with hearts open to beauty, let us embrace the arts and the generation of learning that we should have wisdom.
Let what wisdom we have, won and wanting, lead us to strive so the seventh generation can live more fully.
It is in that work, and that alone, that we can express our thankful spirit. May we make it so.
For the opening to make it so, let us be truly grateful.
Blessed be, and go in peace.